In the shadowy halls of Ashwood Hall, where ancient books whisper secrets and ghostly lights flicker, Miss Marple unravels a chilling mystery. Strange noises, falling tomes, and a cloaked figure haunt the library, hiding a sinister plot. As she uncovers a hidden room and a cursed legend tied to the Ashwood family, Miss Marple exposes a scheme of greed and deception, proving that even the darkest secrets can't escape her keen eye. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Ashwood Hall. In the drowsy calm of St. Mary Mead, where the seasons turned with the gentle predictability of a well-kept clock, Miss Jane Marple sat in her armchair by the window of her neat cottage, her fingers deftly working a pair of knitting needles. The pale pink wool of a half-finished shawl spilled across her lap, and the soft click of the needles punctuated the quiet morning. Outside, the roses in her garden nodded under the weight of late September dew, and the distant chime of the church clock marked 11. It was a morning like any other, yet Miss Marple's sharp blue eyes, undimmed by age, held a flicker of anticipation, as if she sensed the world was about to nudge her from her routine. The postman's knock came promptly, as it always did, and Florence, her young maid, bustled in with a small stack of letters. Among the usual notes, a thank you from the vicar's wife, a chatty missive from her nephew Raymond, was an envelope that stood apart. It was of heavy cream paper, sealed with a crimson wax crest that bore the image of a quill crossed with a sword. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter within. The handwriting was precise, almost fastidious, the work of a man accustomed to order. "Dear Miss Marple," it began, "I trust this letter finds you well. My name is Sir Henry Ashwood, of Ashwood Hall, Greystone. I'm a scholar of some repute, though I prefer the solitude of my library to public acclaim. I write to request your assistance in a matter most perplexing and, I confess, somewhat distressing. My library, which houses a collection of rare manuscripts, has become the site of inexplicable disturbances. Books misplaced, strange sounds, and lights seen at hours when no one should be about. My staff is unsettled, and my work suffers. I have heard of your remarkable ability to unravel mysteries, and I humbly ask you to spend a week at Ashwood Hall to investigate. Your discretion would be greatly valued. I enclose details for your journey, should you accept. Yours sincerely, Henry Ashwood." Miss Marple folded the letter thoughtfully, her fingers pausing on the crest. Ashwood Hall was not unknown to her. Village gossip, that reliable undercurrent of St. Mary Mead, had occasionally touched upon it. The estate, some 30 miles away, was said to be a grand but sombre place. Its library, a treasure trove of ancient texts, some whispered to be forbidden, even dangerous. Tales of ghostly lights flickering in the halls, windows had reached the village, though Miss Marple, ever sceptical of the supernatural, suspected more earthly causes. "A puzzle," she murmured to herself, her voice soft but tinged with delight, "and one that promises to be most intriguing." She rose, her movements brisk, despite the slight stiffness of age, and consulted her train timetable. The letter included a ticket for the 2:15 to Greystone, a gesture both courteous and insistent. By noon, she had packed a modest suitcase, her best black dress, a warm cardigan, and of course her knitting. Florence, wide-eyed at the prospect of her mistress venturing to a haunted estate, was dispatched to inform the station master of Miss Marple's plans. As she awaited the cab, Miss Marple stood at her window, gazing at the familiar garden. Her mind, however, was already at Ashwood Hall, sifting through possibilities. Disturbances in a library, she mused, were rarely the work of spirits. People, in her experience, were far more likely to unsettle a household, and far more interesting to unravel. The train journey was uneventful, save for a brief conversation with a talkative curate who knew Greystone and its rumours. "They say the library's cursed," he confided, his voice low with relish. "Something about an old family secret. tied to the Ashwoods' ancestors. Miss Marple smiled politely, filing the tidbit away. She alighted at Greystone Station as dusk began to settle, the air sharp with the scent of autumn leaves. A driver, sent by Sir Henry, awaited her, a taciturn man named Tom, who doubled as the hall's groundskeeper. His weathered face betrayed a flicker of unease as he mentioned the library, though he said little else during the drive. Ashwood Hall came into view as the car crested a hill, its silhouette stark against the fading light. The house was a sprawl of grey stone, its towers and gables giving it the air of a medieval fortress. Ivy clung to its walls, and the windows gleamed like watchful eyes. As Miss Marple stepped from the car, a chill breeze stirred her scarf, and she felt the weight of the place, not oppressive, but expectant, as if it held its breath. The front door opened, revealing Mrs. Evans, the housekeeper, a thin woman whose anxious eyes darted to the shadows beyond the hall. "Welcome, Miss Marple," she said, her voice tight. "Sir Henry's waiting in the drawing room. It's about the library, isn't it?" Miss Marple smiled, her expression serene but her mind alert. "So I understand," she replied, stepping into the echoing foyer. The stage was set. The players assembled. Whatever secrets Ashwood Hall's library held, she was determined to uncover them, not with theatrics, but with the quiet, relentless observation that had served her so well in St. Mary Mead. Chapter 2. Arrival at the Hall. The carriage wheels crunched on the gravel drive as Miss Jane Marple's hired car wound its way toward Ashwood Hall, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the rolling hills of Greystone. The landscape was wilder here than in St. Mary Mead, with gnarled oaks and tangled hedgerows framing the approach to the estate. Miss Marple, seated primly with her hands folded over her small black handbag, gazed out the window, her pale blue eyes taking in every detail: the distant church spire, the faint mist curling over the fields, the solitary raven perched on a crumbling gatepost. She had always found that landscapes, like people, revealed much when observed with care. The driver, Tom, the groundskeeper, who had met her at Greystone Station, remained silent, his broad hands gripping the steering wheel with a tension that Miss Marple noted but did not remark upon. His reticence during the journey had been marked, broken only by a curt mention of the library's troubles when she had inquired about the hall. "Not a place for lingering after dark, miss," he had muttered, his eyes fixed on the road. Miss Marple had merely nodded, her expression serene, but her mind was already at work, cataloguing his unease alongside the curate's tales of curses and the cryptic urgency of Sir Henry Ashwood's letter. As the car rounded a final bend, Ashwood Hall came fully into view, and Miss Marple felt a quiet thrill, not of fear, but of anticipation. The house was a formidable structure, its grey stone walls rising 3 stories, punctuated by tall, narrow windows that caught the dying light like mirrors. Gothic arches adorned the entrance, and twin towers flanked the main building, giving it the air of a fortress that had stood sentinel for centuries. Ivy clung tenaciously to the facade, softening its severity but also lending it an air of secrecy, as if the house itself guarded truths it was loath to share. The gravel drive circled a dry fountain, its cracked basin filled with dead leaves, and Miss Marple noted the faint neglect, a sign perhaps of a household distracted by more than scholarly pursuits. Tom pulled the car to a stop, and Miss Marple stepped out, her sensible shoes crunching softly on the gravel. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and fading roses. She adjusted her scarf, a practical woolen one suited to the autumn chill, and turned as the great oak door of the hall creaked open. A woman emerged, her figure slight but her movements brisk, as if propelled by nervous energy. This, Miss Marple deduced, must be Mrs. Evans, the housekeeper. Her grey hair was pinned tightly beneath a starched cap, and her hands twisted in her apron as she approached. "Miss Marple? Oh, thank goodness you've come," Mrs. Evans said, her voice low and tinged with a tremor. "I'm Mrs. Evans, the housekeeper. Sir Henry's expecting you. It's about the library, isn't it?" Her eyes, dark and restless, darted toward the upper windows of the hall, as if expecting to see something there. Miss Marple smiled, her expression one of gentle reassurance, though her mind noted the housekeeper's agitation. "So I gather," she replied, her voice calm and measured. "Sir Henry was kind enough to invite me to look into the matter. I trust I shall not be too great an inconvenience." "Oh no, miss, not at all," Mrs. Evans said quickly, though her hands continued their nervous dance. "It's just, well, you'll see for yourself. This way, please." She gestured toward the door, and Miss Marple followed, her small suitcase in Tom's reluctant grip as he trailed behind. The foyer of Ashwood Hall was as grand as Miss Marple had expected, with a high ceiling adorned with faded frescoes and a marble floor that gleamed dully under a chandelier draped in cobwebs. A broad staircase swept upward, its banister carved with intricate vines, and portraits of stern-faced Ashwoods gazed down from the walls, their eyes seeming to follow the newcomers. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish, and a faint draught stirred the curtains, though no window appeared open. Miss Marple's keen senses registered these details, each a thread in the tapestry of the mystery she had come to unravel. Mrs. Evans led her through a series of corridors, each lined with dark panelling and lit by flickering gas lamps that cast long, wavering shadows. "Sir Henry's in the drawing room," the housekeeper said, her voice dropping to a whisper as they approached a set of double doors. "He's been ever so worried, miss. The library, it's not right. Books falling, strange noises, and lights, miss. Lights where there shouldn't be any." She hesitated, then added, "Some say it's the old curse, but I don't hold with such nonsense." Still, she trailed off, her face pale. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint, reassuring smile. "Old houses often have their quirks, Mrs. Evans," she said. "I'm sure we shall find a perfectly sensible explanation." But her mind was already turning over the housekeeper's words, weighing the mention of a curse against the more likely possibility of human mischief. People, she had long observed, were far more adept at creating disturbances than any ghost. The drawing room was a contrast to the austere foyer, its walls lined with crimson wallpaper and its furniture upholstered in faded velvet. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room, though it did little to dispel the chill that seemed to linger in the air. Sir Henry Ashwood rose from a high-backed chair as Miss Marple entered. His tall frame stooped slightly, as if bowed by the weight of his years or his worries. His hair was white, his face lined, but his eyes were sharp, with the intensity of a man consumed by his passions. In this case, Miss Marple suspected, his library. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice deep and measured, though it carried a note of strain. "I cannot thank you enough for coming. I trust your journey was comfortable." He gestured to a chair near the fire, and Miss Marple settled into it, her knitting bag placed carefully at her feet. "Quite comfortable, thank you," she replied, her tone polite but direct. "Your letter was most intriguing, Sir Henry. Perhaps you could tell me more about these disturbances in your library." Sir Henry sat opposite her, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "It began some weeks ago," he said. "My library is my life's work, a collection of rare manuscripts, some dating back to the 12th century, treatises on alchemy, medieval histories, texts on, well, less orthodox subjects. I've spent decades acquiring them, and I'm currently cataloguing them with the help of Dr. Mortimer, a scholar from Oxford. But recently things have gone awry. Books are found out of place, sometimes open to pages I know were closed. There are noises, whispers, footsteps, when the room is empty, And at night, lights have been seen, flickering in the windows. Miss Marple listened, her fingers resting lightly on her knitting bag, her eyes fixed on Sir Henry's face. She noted the way his voice tightened when he spoke of the library, the slight tremor in his hands. "And your household?" she asked gently. "Who else resides here?" "A small staff," Sir Henry replied. "Mrs. Evans, whom you've met, runs the house. Tom, the groundskeeper, handles the estate's upkeep. My niece Clara lives here as well. She's a bright girl, studying literature, though she's been unsettled by all this. And Dr. Mortimer, of course, who's been invaluable with the cataloguing. No one else comes near the library, except on my instruction." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already sketching a map of the household. "And these disturbances," she said, "have they caused any specific harm? Missing books, perhaps, or damage to the manuscripts?" Sir Henry hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Nothing missing, as far as I can tell. But the disruption is intolerable. My work is at a standstill. And the staff, well, they're frightened. Mrs. Evans talks of resigning, and even Clara, who's usually so sensible, has taken to avoiding the library." Mrs. Evans, who had lingered by the door, gave a small gasp. "It's not just talk, sir," she said, her voice quavering. "I've heard things, miss. Whispers, like voices reading aloud. And last week, a book fell right at my feet, heavy as a brick. It's not natural, I tell you." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her mind was racing. "Thank you, Mrs. Evans," she said kindly. "I'm sure we shall get to the bottom of it." She turned back to Sir Henry. "Might I see the library now? It would help to understand the setting of these events." "Of course," Sir Henry said, rising. "But I must warn you it's a large room, and not always welcoming at this hour." He glanced at the window, where the last of the daylight had faded, leaving only the flicker of the fire to illuminate the room. Miss Marple followed Sir Henry through another series of corridors, each turn revealing more of the hall's sombre grandeur. The library doors were massive, carved with scenes of scholars bent over scrolls, and they opened with a groan that echoed in the stillness. The room beyond was vast, its high ceiling lost in shadow, its walls lined with shelves that stretched to the rafters. Ladders on rails provided access to the upper shelves, and a long table ran down the centre, strewn with manuscripts and papers. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather and vellum, and a single chandelier cast a dim glow, leaving the corners of the room in darkness. "This is magnificent," Miss Marple said softly, her eyes scanning the shelves. She noted the meticulous order of the books, the faint dust on some, the gleam of others that had been recently handled. A large window dominated one wall, its leaded panes offering a view of the darkened grounds. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the spine of a book bound in faded red leather. Its title, in Latin, hinted at alchemical secrets, and she felt a prickle of curiosity. Sir Henry stood by the table, his face a mixture of pride and unease. "This is where it happens," he said. "The disturbances are most frequent at night, though no one dares linger here after dusk." Miss Marple turned, her gaze sweeping the room. "And the lights you mentioned?" she asked. "Where are they seen?" "From the grounds," Sir Henry replied. "Tom reported them first, though Clara's seen them too. A glow moving across the windows, as if someone were carrying a lamp." Miss Marple nodded, her mind conjuring an image not of a ghost, but of a figure with a purpose. She was about to ask another question when a faint sound caught her attention, a soft rustle, like the turning of a page. She froze, her head tilted, listening. The sound came again, from a shadowed corner near the far shelves. Sir Henry's face paled, but Miss Marple moved toward the sound, her steps deliberate. "It's nothing," Sir Henry said quickly, though his voice lacked conviction. "The wind, perhaps, or the house settling." Miss Marple reached the corner and peered into the gloom. A book lay on the floor, its pages splayed open as if it had fallen from the shelf. She bent to retrieve it, noting its weight and the faint embossing of a serpent on its cover. Curious, she murmured, her fingers tracing the symbol. She glanced at Sir Henry, who had followed her, his expression unreadable. Does this book hold particular significance? He hesitated, then shook his head. It's one of many, he said. A treatise on medieval rituals, nothing more. Miss Marple smiled, but her eyes were sharp. She replaced the book on the shelf, noting its position and the faint smudge of dust disturbed around it. Someone, she thought, had been here recently. Someone who knew the library's secrets better than they let on. As they left the library, Miss Marple caught a glimpse of a young woman in the corridor, a girl of about 20, with dark hair and a quick, assessing gaze. This, she assumed, was Clara, Sir Henry's niece. The girl paused, her eyes flicking from Miss Marple to the library doors, then turned and vanished around a corner. Miss Marple made a mental note of her wariness, adding it to the growing list of observations that would, in time, form a pattern. Back in the drawing room, Sir Henry offered her tea, which she accepted with a nod. As Mrs. Evans bustled in with a tray, Miss Marple settled into her chair, her knitting bag at her side. The household, she sensed, was a microcosm of secrets, each member carrying their own fears or motives. The library, with its ancient texts and whispered disturbances, was merely the stage on which those secrets played out. She sipped her tea, her mind as sharp as the needles in her bag, already weaving the threads of the mystery into a tapestry only she could yet see. Chapter 3. The Whispering Shelves. Miss Jane Marple awoke early the next morning, the pale light of dawn filtering through the heavy curtains of her guest room at Ashwood Hall. The room was comfortably appointed, with a 4-poster bed and a mahogany writing desk, but the air held a chill that seemed to seep from the very walls. She rose, her movements brisk despite the hour, and dressed in her usual sensible attire, a navy skirt and a cardigan of soft grey wool. Her knitting bag, ever her companion, rested on a chair by the window, and she paused to glance at the grounds below, where a thin mist clung to the lawns like a shroud. The raven from yesterday perched on the same gatepost, its black eyes fixed on the hall, as if it too were waiting for something to unfold. Breakfast was served in a small dining room, its walls hung with faded tapestries depicting pastoral scenes. Miss Marple was joined by Clara, Sir Henry's niece, whose dark eyes held a spark of curiosity tempered by caution. The girl, dressed in a simple but elegant frock, offered a polite smile as she passed the toast. "I hope you slept well, Miss Marple," she said, her voice light, but with an edge that suggested she was testing the waters. "Quite well, thank you," Miss Marple replied, her tone warm but her gaze observant. She noted Clara's quick glance toward the door, as if expecting someone, or something, to interrupt. "This is a remarkable house. I imagine it holds many stories." Clara's smile faltered, and she buttered her toast with unnecessary care. "Oh, it does," she said. "Too many, perhaps. Uncle Henry's library is the heart of it, but lately, well, you've heard about the disturbances." Miss Marple nodded, sipping her tea. "Sir Henry mentioned them, yes, and Mrs. Evans spoke of whispers and falling books. Have you noticed anything unusual yourself?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on her knife. "I've heard things," she admitted, her voice dropping. "At night, mostly. A sort of murmuring, like someone reading aloud in a language I can't understand. And once I saw a light moving in the library, though the doors were locked." She paused, then added, "I don't believe in ghosts, Miss Marple, but it's unsettling. Most unsettling things have a human cause, in my experience," Miss Marple said gently, her eyes kind but piercing. Clara's face betrayed a flicker of relief, as if she had hoped for such a reassurance, and Miss Marple filed this away, noting the girl's intelligence and her guarded demeanour. Sir Henry joined them shortly, his face drawn as if he had slept poorly. He spoke little, his thoughts clearly on the library, and excused himself to meet Dr. Mortimer, the visiting scholar, who was due to continue cataloguing that morning. Miss Marple, left with Clara, steered the conversation to lighter topics, the gardens, the history of Greystone, but her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of what she had learned. The library, she decided, demanded a closer inspection, and she resolved to visit it before the household grew too busy. By mid-morning, Miss Marple made her way to the library, her knitting bag slung over her arm like a faithful squire. The great doors stood ajar, and she slipped inside, pausing to let her eyes adjust to the dim light. The room was as imposing as it had been the previous evening, its shelves towering like sentinels, their contents a silent testament to centuries of knowledge. The chandelier above cast a feeble glow, and the tall window admitted slants of grey light that did little to dispel the shadows. Miss Marple moved slowly along the shelves, her fingers trailing lightly over the spines of books, some bound in cracked leather, others in vellum that felt almost alive under her touch. The titles were a mix of Latin, Old French and English, many hinting at esoteric subjects, alchemy, astrology, the occult. She noted the meticulous order, but also the faint signs of disturbance. A book slightly askew here, a gap there, where one had been removed. As she reached a section near the back of the room, where the shelves were older and the air heavier with dust, she heard it. A faint, sibilant sound, like a whisper carried on a draught. She froze, her knitting needles still in her bag, her senses sharp. The sound came again, indistinct but rhythmic, as if someone were reciting words just beyond comprehension. Miss Marple's lips pursed, not in fear, but in concentration. She stepped closer to the source, a narrow alcove where the shelves formed a recess, and scanned the titles. One book caught her eye, its cover embossed with the same serpent symbol she had seen the night before. It was a heavy volume, its pages yellowed, and it protruded slightly, as if recently handled. Before she could reach for it, a soft thud broke the silence. A book had fallen from a shelf some yards away, landing splayed open on the polished floor. Miss Marple moved toward it, her steps deliberate, and bent to retrieve it. It was a slim volume, bound in dark green leather, titled De Maledictionibus Antiquis, a treatise on ancient curses. She opened it carefully, noting a passage marked in faint pencil. The guardian of the shrine shall bind the house, its secrets sealed in shadow. The serpent symbol appeared again, etched in the margin. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Most curious," she murmured, her voice barely audible. A shadow moved at the edge of her vision, and she turned to see Dr. Mortimer standing in the doorway, his thin frame outlined by the light from the corridor. His spectacles glinted, and his hands clutched a notebook as if it were a shield. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice tight with surprise. "I didn't expect to find you here so early." "I find mornings best for clear thinking," she replied, her tone mild, but her gaze steady. "This is a remarkable collection. You must find your work here fascinating." Dr. Mortimer nodded, stepping into the room. "It is," he said, though his eyes flicked to the book in her hands. "Sir Henry's library is unparalleled, but it's not without its challenges." He hesitated, then added, "That book you're holding, it's one of the more obscure texts. Not my area of expertise, I'm afraid." Miss Marple smiled, closing the book and placing it back on the shelf. "I'm sure you have enough to occupy you," she said. "Sir Henry mentioned you're cataloguing the collection. A daunting task, I imagine." "Daunting, yes," Dr. Mortimer said, adjusting his spectacles. "But rewarding." The manuscripts here could rewrite entire fields of study. His voice held a note of fervour, but his hands betrayed a slight tremble as he set his notebook on the table. Miss Marple noted this, along with the way his eyes darted to the alcove where she had heard the whispers. They were interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Evans, who bustled in with a tray of cleaning supplies, her face pale and her movements jerky. "Oh, miss, I didn't know you'd be here," she said, nearly dropping a duster. "I was just going to tidy up the library. It gets so dusty, and with all that's been happening." Her voice trailed off, and she glanced at Dr. Mortimer, who busied himself with his notebook. "No need to disturb yourself, Mrs. Evans," Miss Marple said kindly. "I was just admiring the room. Tell me, have you heard those whispers you mentioned again recently?" Mrs. Evans's eyes widened, and she crossed herself quickly. "Last night, miss," she whispered. "Clear as day, coming from that corner." She pointed to the alcove, her hand shaking. "I didn't stay to listen, mind you. I locked the doors and went straight to my room." Dr. Mortimer cleared his throat. "Old houses make all sorts of noises," he said, his tone dismissive. "Creaking beams, drafts. It's nothing to fuss over." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind was alight with possibilities. The whispers, the fallen book, the serpent symbol, all pointed to something deliberate, a pattern designed to unsettle or conceal. She thanked Mrs. Evans and Dr. Mortimer and left the library, promising to return later. As she walked back to her room, she passed Tom in the corridor, his arms laden with firewood. He avoided her gaze, his face set in a scowl, and she added his reluctance to her mental ledger. Over luncheon, served in the same dining room, Miss Marple observed the household with renewed focus. Sir Henry was preoccupied, his conversation limited to vague remarks about his work. Clara was animated, asking Miss Marple about St. Mary Mead, but her eyes strayed often to the windows, as if watching for something. Dr. Mortimer joined them late, apologising for his delay, and ate quickly, his manner distracted. Mrs. Evans hovered, her anxiety palpable, and Tom was absent, though his presence lingered in the form of a muddy bootprint near the door. Miss Marple retired to her room after lunch, ostensibly to rest, but her mind was far from idle. She sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking steadily, and reviewed what she had learned. The library was the heart of the mystery, its disturbances a mix of the theatrical and the precise. The whispers suggested a human agent, perhaps using a device or a hidden vantage point. The fallen book, marked with that serpent symbol, hinted at a specific focus, perhaps a single manuscript or a secret tied to it. And the household, she sensed, was a web of tensions, each member holding a piece of the truth. As the afternoon waned, she resolved to return to the library that evening, when the hall was quiet and the shadows deeper. There was something about that alcove, that serpent symbol, that called to her intuition. In St. Mary Mead, she had often found that the smallest details, a misplaced teacup, a glance too long held, revealed the most. Here, in the vastness of Ashwood Hall, she suspected the same principle would hold true. With her knitting bag in hand and her mind as sharp as ever, Miss Marple prepared to unravel the next thread in the mystery of the whispering shelves. Chapter 4. The Shadow in the Corridor. The afternoon at Ashwood Hall passed in a haze of autumn light, the sun slanting through the tall windows and casting intricate patterns on the polished floors. Miss Jane Marple spent it quietly, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm as she sat in the drawing-room, ostensibly absorbed in her pale pink shawl. But her eyes, sharp and unobtrusive behind their mild expression, missed nothing. Clara, Sir Henry's niece, lingered nearby, flipping through a novel with a restlessness that betrayed her calm demeanour. Sir Henry himself was absent, cloistered in his study with Dr. Mortimer, their voices a low murmur behind closed doors. Mrs. Evans moved through, the house like a ghost herself, her footsteps quick and her hands never still, while Tom, the groundskeeper, was glimpsed only once, hauling a sack of leaves across the lawn with a scowl that seemed permanent. Miss Marple's thoughts, however, were fixed on the library, the whispers she had heard that morning, the fallen book with its serpent symbol, and the nervous glances of the household, all pointed to a mystery rooted not in the supernatural, but in human intent. She had seen such patterns before in St. Mary Mead, fear used as a tool, distractions masking deeper motives. As the clock struck 4, she excused herself, citing a need for fresh air, and took a short walk around the grounds. The gardens were overgrown, the rose bushes tangled, and she noted a narrow path leading to a side entrance near the library wing. It was well trodden, though Tom's duties should have kept him elsewhere. Filing this away, she returned to the house, her mind already planning her next move. Dinner was a subdued affair, served in the grand dining room under the watchful eyes of Ashwood ancestors immortalized in oil. Sir Henry presided with distracted courtesy, his conversation limited to remarks on the weather and the progress of his cataloguing. Dr. Mortimer, seated opposite Miss Marple, spoke at length about a 13th century manuscript on herbal law, his enthusiasm bordering on obsession. Clara, picking at her food, interjected with sharp questions, revealing a keen mind beneath her youthful reserve. Mrs. Evans served the meal with a deference that bordered on civility, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting to see the ghostly lights Sir Henry had described. Miss Marple, eating her roast lamb with measured bites, observed the interplay, noting the undercurrents of tension that ran beneath the polite surface. After dinner, Clara approached her in the drawing room, her expression hesitant but determined. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "I need to tell you something. It's about the library." She glanced over her shoulder, ensuring they were alone, then leaned closer. "I've seen something at night, a figure, moving in the corridor near the library. It was tall, too tall to be anyone in the house, and it wore a cloak, like something out of a story. I followed it once, but it vanished before I could see where it went." Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind was alert. "When was this, my dear?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. "3 nights ago," Clara replied. "I couldn't sleep, so I was reading in my room. I heard footsteps, heavy ones, and looked out. The figure was heading toward the library. I thought it might be Uncle Henry, but when I checked, his room was dark and he was asleep." "Did you see its face?" Miss Marple asked, her knitting needles pausing. Clara shook her head. "It was too dark, and it moved so quickly. But it frightened me, Miss Marple. I know it sounds foolish, but with all the stories about the library," she trailed off, her hands twisting in her lap. "Not foolish at all," Miss Marple said reassuringly. "You were wise to tell me. I shall keep it in mind." She patted Clara's hand, her touch light but comforting, and the girl managed a small smile before excusing herself to bed. Miss Marple remained in the drawing room, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts racing. Clara's story of the cloaked figure aligned with the village rumours of a spectral guardian, but Miss Marple was not one to credit ghosts when human agency was more likely. The figure, she suspected, was no apparition but a person with a purpose, perhaps to frighten, perhaps to conceal. She resolved to keep watch that night, to see if the shadow would reappear. At 11:30, when the house had settled into silence, Miss Marple slipped from her room, her slippers silent on the cold stone floor. She wore a dark shawl over her nightdress, her knitting bag left behind to free her hands. The corridor was dimly lit by a single gas lamp, its flame flickering as if stirred by an unseen breath. She moved with the careful grace of one accustomed to going unnoticed, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. Positioning herself in a recessed doorway opposite the library wing, she waited, her breathing slow and steady, her senses attuned to the slightest sound. The clock in the hall chimed midnight, its notes echoing through the stillness. For a time, nothing stirred, and Miss Marple's patience was tested by the chill creeping into her bones. Then, a faint creak broke the silence, the sound of a floorboard under weight. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her eyes fixed on the corridor. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and cloaked, its movement swift but deliberate. It glided toward the library doors, its outline blurred by the dim light. But Miss Marple noted the way it moved. Purposeful, not spectral. The figure paused at the doors, its head turning as if to check for watchers, then slipped inside, the doors closing with a soft thud. Miss Marple waited a moment, then followed, her steps cautious. The library doors were unlocked, a fact she found significant, and she eased one open, slipping into the vast room. The chandelier was unlit, but a faint glow came from the far end, near the alcove where she had heard the whispers that morning. She moved silently along the shelves, her heart steady despite the eerie atmosphere. The glow flickered, as if from a candle, and she caught a glimpse of the cloaked figure bending over the table, its back to her. Papers rustled, and she heard a low mutter, not the whispers of before, but a voice, human and urgent. Before she could get closer, the figure straightened, extinguishing the light. Miss Marple ducked behind a shelf, her breath held as the figure moved swiftly toward the doors. It passed within feet of her, and she caught a glimpse of fabric, a heavy cloak, perhaps from the hall's attic, but no face, no clear sign of identity. The doors opened and closed, and the figure was gone. Miss Marple emerged from her hiding place, her mind racing. She approached the table, her eyes scanning its surface. The serpent-marked book from the morning lay open, its pages turned to a passage on protective rituals, the Latin text dense with arcane references. Beside it was a sheet of paper, hastily scrawled with notes in a hand she did not recognize. Phrases like guardian's seal and shrine's power. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her sleeve, intending to examine it later. The library was silent now, its shadows deeper without the candle's glow. Miss Marple stood for a moment, her thoughts a whirl of possibilities. The cloaked figure was no ghost, of that she was certain, but its purpose was still obscure. Was it searching for something in the library's collection, or staging a performance to keep others away? And why the focus on that particular book, with its serpent symbol and cryptic passages? She left the library, locking the doors behind her, a precaution, though she doubted it would deter the figure if it wished to return. As she made her way back to her room, the house seemed to watch her, its silence heavy with secrets. She passed Clara's door, noting the sliver of light beneath it, and wondered if the girl was still awake, perhaps wrestling with her own fears. Dr. Mortimer's room was dark, as was Sir Henry's, but Miss Marple's intuition told her that sleep was not universal in Ashwood Hall that night. Back in her room, she sat by the window, the folded paper in her hand. She did not light a lamp, preferring the moonlight to keep her thoughts clear. The notes were fragmented, written in haste, but they suggested an obsession with the library's oldest texts, perhaps those tied to the Ashwood family's history. She recalled Sir Henry's mention of the library being built on an ancient site, and Clara's talk of a cloaked figure. The pieces were beginning to align, though the picture remained incomplete. Miss Marple slipped the paper into her knitting bag, her fingers brushing the soft wool of her shawl. Tomorrow she would speak to Clara again, and perhaps Tom, whose avoidance of the library was becoming more significant. She would also watch Dr. Mortimer closely, for his scholarly zeal might mask a deeper motive. The shadow in the corridor had given her a glimpse of the mystery's heart, but it was only a glimpse. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that patience and observation were the keys to unlocking even the most stubborn secrets, and she was prepared to wait as long as necessary to unravel the truth of Ashwood Hall. Chapter 5. The Hidden Room. The morning following her midnight encounter in the library, Miss Jane Marple rose with the dawn, her mind as clear as the pale light filtering through her window at Ashwood Hall. The memory of the cloaked figure, the scrawled notes, and the serpent-marked book lingered like threads waiting to be woven into a pattern. She dressed in her usual understated attire, a tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan, her movements brisk despite the late hour of her vigil. Her knitting bag, now containing the mysterious paper, sat ready on the bedside table, a silent partner in her investigation. As she pinned her hat in place, she glanced at the misty grounds below, where Tom was visible, raking leaves with a sullen air. His reluctance to linger near the library, she mused, was a piece of the puzzle yet to be placed. Breakfast was a quiet affair, with Sir Henry absent, reportedly breakfasting in his study, and Dr. Mortimer already at work in the library. Clara joined Miss Marple at the table, her face pale but composed, though her fingers toyed nervously with a silver spoon. "Did you sleep well, Miss Marple?" she asked, her voice betraying a hope for reassurance. "Well enough, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her smile gentle but her eyes keen. "And you? I noticed a light under your door last night. I hope nothing disturbed you." Clara's hand stilled, and she met Miss Marple's gaze with a flicker of surprise. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I kept thinking about that figure I saw. I thought I heard footsteps again, but I didn't dare look." She hesitated, then added, "Miss Marple, do you think there's something truly wrong in this house?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene. "Houses, like people, can seem troubled when secrets are kept," she said. "I find that a little light, clear observation, you know, often dispels the shadows." Clara nodded, though her eyes remained troubled, and Miss Marple resolved to draw her further into confidence. The girl's intelligence and her access to the household made her a valuable ally. After breakfast, Miss Marple proposed a morning walk to Clara, suggesting they explore the library together. "I'd like to understand its layout better," she said, her tone casual. "An old room like that must have its quirks, don't you think?" Clara agreed, her curiosity piqued, and the two set off, leaving Mrs. Evans to her duties and Dr. Mortimer to his manuscripts. The library, in the soft morning light, was less foreboding than at night, though its vastness still commanded respect. The shelves loomed like silent guardians, their contents a testament to centuries of scholarship. Miss Marple moved with purpose, her eyes scanning not just the books, but the room itself, the panelling, the mouldings, the spaces where shadows might hide more than dust. Clara followed, her initial hesitation giving way to interest as Miss Marple pointed out details. A worn spot on the floor near the alcove, a faint scratch on a shelf that suggested frequent handling. "Clara," Miss Marple said, pausing near the alcove where she had heard the whispers, "have you ever noticed anything unusual about this part of the room? The shelves here seem older, don't they?" Clara frowned, stepping closer. "I suppose they do," she said. "Uncle Henry says this section holds the oldest books, the ones his ancestors collected. I've never looked closely, though. Dr. Mortimer usually works here, and he's particular about being disturbed." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "Let's be a little particular ourselves, shall we?" she said, her fingers brushing the edge of a panel. It was oak, darkened by age, and its seams were almost invisible, but her keen eyes caught a slight irregularity, a gap where the wood met the wall. She pressed gently, and to Clara's gasp, the panel shifted, revealing a narrow door, its hinges concealed by clever craftsmanship. "A hidden room!" Clara exclaimed, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I had no idea!" "Old houses often have such secrets," Miss Marple said calmly, though her heart quickened. She pushed the door open, revealing a small chamber, no larger than a closet, its walls lined with shelves that held a dozen or so books. The air was musty, heavy with the scent of decay, and a single, high window admitted a sliver of light. The books were ancient, their bindings cracked, some wrapped in cloth to protect their fragile pages. One, bound in black leather, bore the familiar serpent symbol, its edges worn, but its presence commanding. Miss Marple stepped inside, her movements careful to avoid stirring the dust. Clara followed, her eyes wide. "What are these?" she asked, reaching for the black book. "Uncle Henry never mentioned a hidden room." "Perhaps he didn't know," Miss Marple said, though her tone suggested she doubted this. She took the black book from Clara, opening it to find pages dense with Latin text, interspersed with diagrams of circles and symbols. The title page read, "Liber Custodis," and a passage caught her eye. "The guardian of the shrine shall watch eternal, bound by the serpent's seal, to protect the house from those who seek its heart." The words were ominous, but Miss Marple's mind was already turning to practical matters. She noted fresh fingerprints in the dust on the shelf. Someone had been here recently, and not for idle curiosity. "Look at this," Clara said, pointing to a small wooden box tucked beneath a shelf. It was locked, its surface carved with the same serpent motif. Miss Marple examined it, her fingers tracing the carvings, but she made no attempt to open it. "We must be careful," she said. "This room is part of the mystery, but we mustn't disturb it yet." Clara nodded, her face pale. "Do you think this is what the figure was looking for?" she asked. "Something in here?" "It's possible," Miss Marple replied, her voice thoughtful. "But I suspect the disturbances, the whispers, the lights, are meant to keep us away from this room, not draw us to it." She closed the book and replaced it, noting its exact position. "Let's keep this discovery between us for now, Clara. It may give us an advantage." They left the hidden room, closing the panel with care, and Miss Marple led Clara back to the main library. As they emerged, Dr. Mortimer entered, his arms laden with papers. He stopped short, his spectacles glinting as he took in their presence. "Miss Marple, Clara," he said, his voice sharp with surprise. "I didn't expect to find you here." "We were admiring the collection," Miss Marple said smoothly, her expression disarming. "It's quite overwhelming, isn't it? So many treasures." Dr. Mortimer relaxed slightly, though his eyes lingered on the alcove. "Indeed," he said. "I'm cataloguing a particularly rare manuscript today. A 14th century alchemical text. Fascinating, but delicate work." He moved to the table, his movements brisk, and Miss Marple noted the way he positioned himself to block their view of the alcove. "Fascinating indeed," she said, her tone light. "We won't disturb you further." She guided Clara out, her mind racing with new questions. The hidden room was a significant find, its contents suggesting a deeper connection to the Ashwood family's history, and perhaps to the disturbances plaguing the library. The fingerprints, the locked box, the serpent symbol, all pointed to a secret someone was desperate to protect or uncover. Over tea that afternoon, Miss Marple drew Clara into a quiet corner of the drawing room. "Tell me more about your uncle's work," she said, her knitting needles clicking softly. "Does he ever speak of the older books, the ones in that alcove?" Clara shook her head. "Not really. He's proud of the library, but he leaves the older texts to Dr. Mortimer. He says they're too obscure for his current research, but—" She hesitated, then leaned closer. "I've seen him looking at that serpent symbol before, on a ring he keeps in his study. He doesn't wear it, but he showed it to me once, said it was an old family heirloom." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained placid. "An heirloom," she murmured. "How interesting." The ring, she suspected, might be another link to the shrine mentioned in the texts. She made a mental note to examine Sir Henry's study, if an opportunity arose. As evening approached, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the cloaked figure. The hidden room suggested a motive, perhaps a valuable manuscript, or a secret tied to the Ashwood legacy. But the theatrics of the disturbances, the whispers, the lights, the fallen books, pointed to a deliberate campaign, one designed to frighten or distract. She decided to spend another night watching the corridor, but first she would speak to Tom, whose avoidance of the library was becoming more conspicuous. She found him in the stable yard, polishing a pair of boots with a vigour that seemed born of frustration. "Good afternoon, Tom," she said, her voice warm but direct. "You've been working hard, I see. Do you ever have cause to visit the library?" Tom's hands stilled, and he looked up, his eyes wary. "Not if I can help it, miss," he said gruffly. "That place gives me the creeps. My granddad worked here, years ago, and he said to steer clear. Said the Ashwoods stirred up things best left alone." He resumed polishing, his movements sharp. Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Old stories can be powerful," she said. "Did your grandfather mention anything specific? A symbol, perhaps, or a tale about the family?" Tom hesitated, then shook his head. "Just said the library was no place for honest folk. I keep to the grounds, miss. Safer that way." He turned away, signalling the conversation's end, but Miss Marple noted the fear in his voice, a fear that seemed rooted in more than superstition. As she returned to the house, Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of connections: the hidden room, the serpent symbol, Tom's reticence, Clara's observations, Dr. Mortimer's protectiveness. The mystery was deepening, but she felt the threads drawing tighter. Tonight, she would watch the corridor again, and tomorrow she would find a way to speak to Sir Henry about that ring. In St. Mary Mead, she had often found that the smallest details, a word, a gesture, a hidden door, held the key to the truth. Here, in the shadowed halls of Ashwood, she was certain the same would prove true. Chapter 6. The Scholar's Secret. The discovery of the hidden room had sharpened Miss Jane Marple's focus, and as the morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Ashwood Hall, she sat in her guest room, her knitting needles idle for once. The paper she had found in the library, with its cryptic notes about a guardian's seal and a shrine's power, lay folded in her knitting bag, a tangible clue that weighed heavily on her mind. The serpent symbol, the cloaked figure, the whispers, all were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a human hand orchestrating the disturbances. But whose hand, and to what end? Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, sharp despite the soft lines of her face, gazed out at the misty grounds, where the raven still perched, its presence a silent reminder of the secrets this house held. She dressed with her usual care, a sensible skirt and a pale blue cardigan, her movements deliberate as she prepared for the day. The household was stirring, and she heard Mrs. Evans's quick footsteps in the corridor, followed by the clatter of a tray. Miss Marple's plan was clear. She needed to probe deeper into the motivations of those closest to the library, starting with Dr. Mortimer, whose scholarly zeal had struck her as both genuine and suspiciously intense. His protectiveness over the manuscripts, coupled with his unease in the library yesterday, suggested he knew more than he let on. At breakfast, served in the small dining room with its faded tapestries, Miss Marple found only Clara and Mrs. Evans present. Sir Henry, Clara explained, had taken to eating in his study, and Dr. Mortimer was already at work. "He's obsessed with those old books," Clara said, her tone a mix of admiration and frustration. "He barely speaks to anyone now, just scribbles notes and locks things away." Miss Marple nodded, buttering her toast with precision. "A dedicated scholar," she remarked, her voice mild. "Does he ever discuss his findings with you, Clara? Or perhaps with Sir Henry?" Clara shook her head. "Not really. He says the texts are too complex for casual conversation. But I've seen him poring over that book with the serpent on it, the one you found yesterday. He gets this look, like he's found something extraordinary. She paused, then added, I don't trust him completely, Miss Marple. He's too secretive. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. Secretiveness is often a habit of those who feel they have something to protect, she said, or something to gain. Clara's words confirmed her suspicion that Dr. Mortimer was a key figure in the mystery, and she resolved to speak to him alone. After breakfast, she made her way to the library, her knitting bag slung over her arm. The great doors were ajar, and she found Dr. Mortimer at the long table, surrounded by manuscripts and a leather-bound notebook filled with his precise handwriting. He looked up as she entered, his spectacles catching the light, and his face betrayed a flicker of irritation before he masked it with a polite smile. Good morning, Miss Marple, he said, setting down his pen. I trust you're finding Ashwood Hall enlightening. Very much so, she replied, settling into a chair across from him. This library is a treasure. You must feel privileged to work with such rare texts. Dr. Mortimer's expression softened, his enthusiasm evident. It's a scholar's dream, he said. Some of these manuscripts are unique. Insights into alchemy, medieval mysticism, even rituals that predate the church. Sir Henry's collection could reshape our understanding of history if properly studied. Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded over her bag. And yet, these disturbances must be a hindrance, she said, her tone gentle but probing. Books falling, whispers, lights. It's enough to unsettle anyone. Have you experienced anything unusual yourself? Dr. Mortimer hesitated, his fingers tightening on his notebook. I've heard the whispers, he admitted, his voice low. Late at night, when I'm working. They're faint, like voices from another room. And once, a book did fall, right behind me, though I was alone. But I assure you, Miss Marple, I'm not one for ghost stories. It's likely just the house, or perhaps someone playing tricks. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. Tricks can be revealing, she said. Tell me, Doctor. Mortimer, are there any manuscripts you find particularly compelling? That book with the serpent symbol, for instance, Liber Custodis. It seems to hold a special place. His eyes widened briefly, and he adjusted his spectacles. A nervous gesture Miss Marple noted. It's an interesting text, he said carefully. A 12th century work on protective rituals tied to ancient shrines. It's valuable for its historical context, but I'm more focused on the alchemical texts. They're my specialty. Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze steady. Yet you've handled it recently, haven't you? The dust on its shelf was disturbed, and I noticed your notebook has similar symbols sketched in it. She spoke softly, but her words carried a quiet authority, and Dr. Mortimer's face paled. You're observant, he said, his voice tight. Very well, I'll be frank. That book fascinates me, not for any supernatural nonsense, but for its scholarship. It describes rituals that might connect to the Ashwood family's history, perhaps even to this house. I've been studying it, yes, but only to understand its significance. I haven't caused these disturbances, if that's what you're implying. Miss Marple's smile was disarming, though her mind was sharp. I imply nothing, Dr. Mortimer, she said. I merely seek to understand. Knowledge, as you know, can be a powerful motive, and power, in any form, can tempt even the most dedicated scholar. Dr. Mortimer flushed, but before he could respond, the library doors swung open, and Sir Henry entered, his face drawn. Miss Marple, Dr. Mortimer, he said, his voice strained. I've just received a troubling report from Mrs. Evans. She found another book this morning, open on the table, its pages stained, as if with blood. Miss Marple rose, her expression calm but alert. May I see it? She asked, and Sir Henry led them to a side table where a heavy volume lay open, its pages marked with dark red streaks. Mrs. Evans hovered nearby, her hands wringing her apron. It was like this when I came in, she said, her voice trembling. I swear I didn't touch it, miss. It's that curse, I tell you. The library's cursed. Miss Marple bent over the book, her nose wrinkling slightly. She touched the stain, then sniffed her fingers, her eyes narrowing. Ink, she declared, her voice firm. Red ink, not blood. A dramatic touch, but not a supernatural one. She turned to Sir Henry. Was this book significant to your collection? He frowned, examining the title. It's a history of the Ashwood family, he said. Not one of the rarer texts, but it mentions the old shrine beneath the house. A legend, really, about a guardian spirit tied to our lineage. I've never given it much thought. Miss Marple's mind seized on the word shrine, connecting it to the notes she had found and the hidden room's texts. A legend can be a powerful thing, she said, especially if someone believes it holds a secret worth pursuing. She glanced at Dr. Mortimer, whose face remained impassive, though his hands were clenched. Determined to press her advantage, Miss Marple excused herself and sought out Clara, finding her in the garden, sketching the fountain. Clara, she said, settling beside her, you mentioned your uncle's ring with the serpent symbol. Could you tell me more about it? Did he ever say where it came from? Clara set down her pencil, her expression thoughtful. He called it a family relic, she said. Said it was passed down from the first Ashwoods who built this house. He keeps it in a locked drawer in his study, but he showed it to me once. It's heavy, gold, with a serpent carved into it. He said it was tied to the library somehow, but he didn't explain. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The ring, the shrine, the hidden room, all were linked, she was certain, to the disturbances. She thanked Clara and returned to the house, her thoughts turning to Sir Henry. A private conversation with him was necessary, but it would require tact, given his preoccupation and the household's growing unease. That evening, after dinner, Miss Marple found Sir Henry alone in his study, a small room lined with books and maps. He was polishing the serpent ring, his face etched with worry. Miss Marple, he said, setting the ring aside, I'm at my wit's end. These disturbances, they're ruining my work, my peace. I understand, she said, her voice soothing. Sir Henry, may I ask about this ring? Clara mentioned it's a family heirloom tied to the library. Does it have a story? He hesitated, then sighed. It's an old tale, he said. My ancestors built this house on the site of a pagan shrine, said to be guarded by a spirit bound by a serpent seal. The ring was a symbol of that guardianship, meant to protect the family's secrets. I never believed it, but the library's texts, some of them, mention the shrine. I've kept the ring locked away, more out of tradition than faith. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her expression remained placid. And the hidden room in the library? She asked gently. Did you know of it? Sir Henry's face paled. Hidden room? He said. No, I had no idea. Where is it? She described the panel in the alcove, watching his reaction closely. His shock seemed genuine, but Miss Marple knew better than to trust appearances alone. It contains old texts, she said, one with the same serpent symbol. Perhaps someone believes the shrine, or its secrets, holds value. Sir Henry shook his head, his hands trembling. I've been a fool, he muttered. I thought the disturbances were pranks or imagination, but if there's a hidden room... He trailed off, his eyes distant. Miss Marple left him to his thoughts, her own mind a whirl of connections. Dr. Mortimer's obsession, the hidden room, the ring, the shrine, all pointed to a secret someone was desperate to uncover or conceal. The red ink was a theatrical touch, meant to frighten, but it also suggested a mind that thrived on drama. As she prepared for another night of watching the corridor, Miss Marple felt the threads of the mystery tightening, drawing her closer to the truth hidden in the shadows of Ashwood Hall. Chapter 7. The Groundskeeper's Tale. The morning after her conversation with Sir Henry, Miss Jane Marple awoke with a sense of purpose that belied the grey light filtering through the heavy curtains of her room at Ashwood Hall. The revelations of the hidden room, the serpent ring, and the staged disturbances had sharpened her focus, and she felt the mystery beginning to take shape, like a skein of wool unravelling to reveal its pattern. Her thoughts turned to Tom, the groundskeeper, whose avoidance of the library and cryptic remarks about his grandfather's warnings suggested he held a piece of the puzzle. His reticence, she suspected, was not mere superstition, but a fear rooted in something tangible, perhaps a family memory that intersected with the library's secrets. She dressed in her customary attire, a sensible grey skirt and a rose-pink cardigan, her knitting bag slung over her arm as she descended to breakfast. The dining room was quiet, with only Clara present, her face drawn as she sipped her tea. Sir Henry, Clara reported, was indisposed, shaken by the news of the hidden room, and Dr. Mortimer was already in the library, his work uninterrupted by the previous day's drama. Mrs. Evans bustled in with a tray, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she'd slept poorly. Miss Marple noted the housekeeper's agitation, wondering if it stemmed from guilt, fear, or something else entirely. "Clara," Miss Marple said, spreading marmalade on her toast with deliberate care, "you mentioned Tom's reluctance to enter the library. Has he ever spoken to you about his grandfather's time here?" Clara shook her head, her expression thoughtful. "Not much, only that his grandfather was groundskeeper too, years ago. Tom's family has worked here for generations. He did say once that his grandfather told stories about the library, strange ones, about things hidden in the walls. I thought he was just repeating old tales to scare me." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her face remained serene. "Old tales often have a grain of truth," she said. "I think I shall have a word with Tom this morning. A groundskeeper sees much, you know, even if he doesn't always speak of it." After breakfast, Miss Marple ventured into the gardens, where the air was crisp and the grass damp with dew. She found Tom near the stables, sharpening a pair of shears with a rhythmic scrape that echoed in the stillness. His broad shoulders were hunched, and his face, weathered by years outdoors, bore the same sullen expression she had noted before. He looked up as she approached, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if wary of her intent. "Good morning, Tom," Miss Marple said, her voice warm and disarming. "You keep these grounds beautifully. It must be quite a responsibility, maintaining an estate like Ashwood Hall." Tom grunted, his hands pausing on the shears. "It's work, miss," he said gruffly. "Been in my family for years. We do what's needed." Miss Marple settled on a nearby bench, her knitting bag at her side, and began to work on her shawl, the needles clicking softly. "Your grandfather was groundskeeper here, I understand," she said, her tone conversational. "He must have had some stories about the hall. Old houses like this always have their legends." Tom's jaw tightened, and he resumed sharpening the shears with unnecessary force. "He told plenty," he said, "most of 'em not fit for polite company. Said the Ashwoods meddled with things they shouldn't, especially in that library. Things that ought to stay buried." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes fixed on him with gentle curiosity. "Buried, you say? Did he speak of a shrine, perhaps, or a symbol? A serpent, maybe?" Tom's hands stilled, and he looked at her sharply, his eyes dark with unease. "You've been poking around, haven't you, miss?" he said, his voice low. "Grandad mentioned a shrine, yes. Said it was under the library, built long before the hall. The Ashwoods were supposed to guard it, or so the story went. The serpent was part of it, a mark of some old pact. He warned me never to go near the library, said it brought nothing but trouble." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. "And you've kept that advice, I see. You avoid the library, don't you?" Tom shifted uncomfortably, setting the shears aside. "I do," he admitted. "Seen things, miss. That figure, the one Miss Clara talks about. I've seen it too, moving toward the library at night. tall, cloaked, like something out of Grandad's stories. I don't know if it's a ghost or not, but I don't want no part of it. When did you last see it? Miss Marple asked, her voice soft but insistent. 2 nights back, Tom said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I was checking the gates, and there it was, slipping through the side door near the library wing. I didn't follow. I locked up and went home. He hesitated, then added, I don't tell Miss Clara or the others. They're spooked enough. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, though her smile remained kind. You were wise to stay clear, she said, but telling me was wiser still. Sometimes, Tom, the things that frighten us are less mysterious than they seem. She rose, folding her knitting into her bag. Thank you for your candour. I shan't keep you from your work. As she walked back to the house, Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of connections. Tom's story confirmed the link between the library, the shrine, and the serpent symbol, but his fear suggested he was not the cloaked figure. His avoidance was too genuine, his unease too raw. The figure, she suspected, was someone within the household, using the legend of the shrine to mask their actions. The red ink, the whispers, the fallen books, all were calculated to create an atmosphere of dread, perhaps to drive others away from the hidden room and its secrets. In the drawing room, she found Clara sketching, her pencil moving restlessly over the paper. Miss Marple settled beside her, her knitting resumed, and shared what she had learned from Tom, omitting only the details of her own midnight observations. Clara, she said, your uncle's ring and the hidden room suggest a secret tied to the Ashwood family's past. Have you ever heard talk of a shrine beneath the house? Clara's pencil paused, and she looked up, her eyes wide. Only in passing, she said. Uncle Henry mentioned it once years ago, when I was a child. He said it was just a story, something about an old pagan site the first Ashwoods built over. He laughed it off, but now, she shivered. Do you think it's real, Miss Marple? And that someone's after it? I think, Miss Marple said carefully, that someone believes it's real and that belief is driving their actions. We must be cautious but curious. She patted Clara's hand, her touch reassuring, but her mind was already planning her next step. Dr. Mortimer's obsession with the Liber Custodes and Sir Henry's ignorance of the hidden room suggested a divide in knowledge, and perhaps in intent. But Mrs. Evans's growing agitation and Tom's fear pointed to a broader web of complicity or coercion. That afternoon, Miss Marple sought out Mrs. Evans, finding her in the kitchen, polishing silver with a fervour that bordered on frantic. Mrs. Evans, she said, her voice warm, you've been so kind to make me feel at home, but I can see you're troubled. Is it the library or something else? Mrs. Evans's hands trembled, and she set down a candlestick with a clatter. It's everything, miss, she said, her voice breaking. The noises, the books, that horrible red ink. I can't sleep for worrying. I've been here 20 years, and I've never seen the like. It's that shrine. I know it. The Ashwoods stirred up something wicked, and now it's come for us. Miss Marple's expression softened, though her mind was alert. Now, she said, let's not leap to curses just yet. Have you noticed anyone acting strangely? Dr. Mortimer, perhaps, or Tom? Mrs. Evans shook her head, her eyes darting to the door. Dr. Mortimer's always in that library muttering to himself. And Tom, he won't go near it. But I've seen nothing specific, miss, only that figure. I saw it last night in the corridor, just like Miss Clara said. I nearly screamed, but it was gone before I could move. Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. The cloaked figure was a constant, seen by Clara, Tom, and now Mrs. Evans. Yet its purpose remained elusive. She thanked the housekeeper and returned to her room, where she retrieved the folded paper from her knitting bag. The notes, Guardian's seal, Shrine's power, suggested a search for something specific, perhaps a relic or a manuscript tied to the shrine. The locked box in the hidden room, she thought, might hold the key. As evening fell, Miss Marple prepared for another night of watching, but first she needed to confirm a theory. She slipped into the library, ensuring Dr. Mortimer was elsewhere, and examined the alcove again. The hidden door was undisturbed, but she noticed a faint scratch on the floor, as if something heavy had been dragged. Kneeling, she traced the mark to a shelf, where a panel of books seemed slightly misaligned. Behind it, she found a small recess, empty but bearing the imprint of a rectangular object, perhaps the locked box, recently moved. The discovery confirmed her suspicion. Someone was actively searching the hidden room, and the disturbances were a distraction to keep others away. Miss Marple replaced the panel and left the library, her mind alight with possibilities. Tom's tale, Mrs. Evans's fear, Clara's observations, and Dr. Mortimer's secrecy all pointed to a conspiracy. But the motive, greed, fear, or something deeper, remained just out of reach. As she settled into her doorway vigil that night, her knitting bag at her side, Miss Marple felt the threads of the mystery drawing ever tighter, pulling her closer to the heart of Ashwood Hall's secrets. Chapter 8. The Unmasking. The air in Ashwood Hall seemed heavier as the day progressed, the weight of its secrets pressing down on Miss Jane Marple as she moved through its shadowed corridors. Her discoveries, the hidden room, the serpent-marked book, the scrawled notes, and the empty recess, had brought her tantalizingly close to the truth, yet the identity of the cloaked figure and their precise motive remained elusive. The disturbances in the library, she was certain, were no supernatural phenomenon, but a calculated effort to conceal a deeper purpose. Her task now was to draw that purpose into the open, and she knew from her years in St. Mary Mead that the surest way to catch a fox was to set a trap it could not resist. After a quiet luncheon, during which Sir Henry remained withdrawn and Dr. Mortimer excused himself early, Miss Marple retired to the drawing-room with Clara, her knitting needles clicking with deceptive calm. The young woman's sharp mind and growing trust made her an ideal confidant, and Miss Marple decided to share just enough to enlist her help. "Clara," she said, her voice low, "I believe the disturbances in the library are the work of someone in this house, not a ghost. The hidden room and its contents are at the heart of it. I'd like to gather everyone tonight and reveal what I've found. It may flush out our culprit." Clara's eyes widened, a mix of excitement and apprehension in her gaze. "You know who it is?" she asked, leaning forward. "Not yet," Miss Marple admitted, her smile faint but reassuring. "But I have a theory, and a gathering in the library will test it. Will you help me arrange it? Tell your uncle and the others that I've solved the mystery and wish to explain at midnight. That hour, I find, has a way of sharpening nerves." Clara nodded, her resolve firming. "I'll do it. But be careful, Miss Marple. Whoever's behind this, they're clever." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch light but steady. "Cleverness often trips over its own cleverness," she said. "We shall see who stumbles tonight." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of subtle preparations. Miss Marple visited the library alone, ensuring the hidden door was secure, but leaving the serpent-marked book, Liber Custodis, on the table as bait. She placed a small piece of thread across the alcove's threshold, invisible unless one looked closely, to detect any intrusion. She also examined the side entrance near the library wing, noting fresh footprints in the soft earth, too large for Mrs. Evans, too deliberate for Tom's workaday tread. Her suspicions, already coalescing, grew sharper. At dinner, Clara announced Miss Marple's plan with a convincing air of excitement, her voice carrying just enough to ensure all heard. Sir Henry looked startled, his fork pausing mid-air, while Dr. Mortimer's spectacles glinted as he shot Miss Marple a quick, assessing glance. Mrs. Evans, serving the meal, nearly dropped a platter, her face pale. Midnight, she whispered. In the library? Oh, miss, I don't know. It will be quite safe, Mrs. Evans, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing but firm. We shall all be together, and mysteries are best unravelled in company. Tom, who had been summoned to clear a spilled glass, muttered something inaudible and retreated, his unease palpable. As midnight approached, Miss Marple prepared with care, slipping the folded paper of notes into her knitting bag and donning a dark shawl to blend with the shadows. She arrived at the library early, checking the thread across the alcove. It was unbroken, suggesting no one had entered the hidden room since her visit. The Liber Custodis lay where she had left it, its pages open to a passage about the shrine's guardian. She settled into a chair near the long table, her knitting bag at her feet, and waited, her senses alert to every creak of the old house. The clock in the hall chimed midnight, its notes echoing through the stillness. One by one, the household arrived. Sir Henry, his face etched with worry. Clara, her eyes bright with anticipation. Dr. Mortimer, clutching his notebook like a talisman. Mrs. Evans, her hands twisting in her apron. And Tom, lingering at the door, his expression sullen. The library's chandelier cast a dim glow, its light flickering across the shelves, and the air was thick with expectation. Miss Marple rose, her small figure commanding despite its unassuming presence. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I've asked you here because I believe the disturbances in this library, the whispers, the lights, the fallen books, are no work of spirits, but of a human hand. Someone in this room has been orchestrating these events, using fear to conceal a theft." A murmur ran through the group, and Mrs. Evans gasped, crossing herself. Sir Henry's brow furrowed, and Dr. Mortimer's grip on his notebook tightened. Clara's eyes darted between them, her face tense. Tom shifted uneasily, his gaze fixed on the floor. Miss Marple stepped toward the alcove, her movements deliberate. "This library holds secrets," she continued, "not just in its books, but in its very walls. Clara and I discovered a hidden room containing texts that speak of a shrine beneath this house, a shrine tied to the Ashwood family and marked by a serpent symbol. Someone has been searching for something within that room, using the disturbances to keep others away." She paused, her eyes sweeping the group. "Last night, I saw a cloaked figure in this library, examining this very book." She gestured to the Liber Custodis. "And I found notes, suggesting a search for the shrine's power. The red ink, the whispers, the lights, all were staged to create an atmosphere of dread. But the real clue was the hidden room, and the empty recess where a box once stood." Dr. Mortimer cleared his throat, his voice sharp. "This is preposterous, Miss Marple. I've been studying those texts, yes, but for scholarship, not theft. I've caused no disturbances." Clara's voice cut through, trembling with indignation. "It's you, Dr. Mortimer. You're always in here, locking things away, sketching those symbols. You want to sell the manuscripts, don't you?" Dr. Mortimer flushed, his spectacles glinting. "That's absurd. I'm a scholar, not a thief." Miss Marple raised a hand, her expression calm but commanding. "Not Dr. Mortimer," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "His ambition is real, but his hands are clean of this scheme." She turned, her eyes fixing on Mrs. Evans, who shrank back, her face ashen. "Mrs. Evans, I'm afraid it's you." The housekeeper gasped, her hands clutching her apron. "Me? Miss, I swear I've done nothing but my duties." Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice gentle but relentless. "You've been clever, Mrs. Evans, but not quite clever enough. The cloaked figure was you, draped in an old curtain from the attic. The whispers were a gramophone hidden behind the shelves. I found its needle marks in the dust. The red ink was from Sir Henry's study, and the fallen books were carefully chosen to fuel the legend of the shrine. You wanted the Liber Custodis, Or perhaps the box it referenced, didn't you? Something you believed could be sold to a collector for a tidy sum. Mrs. Evans's face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. "I didn't mean no harm," she sobbed. "I've been here 20 years, scrimping and saving, and I thought one book, just one, could set me up for life. I heard about a collector in London, pays a fortune for old texts. I used the stories, the shrine, the curse, to scare everyone off. I'm sorry, Sir Henry." Sir Henry's face was a mask of shock, his hands trembling. "Mrs. Evans," he said, his voice hollow. "How could you?" Clara stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You frightened us all. The lights, the noises, it was cruel." Miss Marple's expression softened, though her resolve was firm. "Fear is a powerful tool," she said. "But it leaves traces, Mrs. Evans. The footprints by the side entrance, the disturbed dust, the gramophone's scratches, all pointed to you. The box, I presume, is still in your possession?" Mrs. Evans nodded, tears streaming down her face. "It's in my room," she whispered. "I couldn't open it, but I thought it held something valuable." Miss Marple turned to Sir Henry. "I suggest you retrieve it," she said, "and perhaps call the authorities. Mrs. Evans's actions were wrong, but her desperation is understandable. A quiet resolution may be best." Sir Henry nodded, his face weary. "I'll handle it," he said. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I never imagined—" Dr. Mortimer, his face pale, stepped forward. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I was secretive, yes, but only to protect my research. I had no part in this." Miss Marple's smile was kind. "I know, Dr. Mortimer. Your passion for knowledge is clear, though perhaps a bit too guarded." As the group dispersed, Clara lingered, her eyes shining with admiration. "You were brilliant, Miss Marple," she said. "How did you know?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking. "People, my dear, are much like my knitting," she said. "A single loose thread can unravel the whole pattern if you know where to look." That night, as Mrs. Evans was quietly taken away by the local constable, Miss Marple sat by her window, her shawl nearly complete. The library was silent, its secrets safe for now, but she knew that some threads, the shrine, the box, remained unexplored. Those, she decided, were for another day and another mind. For now, Ashwood Hall could rest. Chapter 9. The Curse Lifted. The morning after the dramatic unmasking in the library, Ashwood Hall seemed to exhale, as if the very stones of the old house had been holding their breath. The oppressive weight of the past weeks, the whispers, the flickering lights, the inexplicable disturbances, had lifted, replaced by a quiet that was not eerie but restorative. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her guest room with a cup of tea and her knitting, felt the change acutely. Her pale pink shawl was nearly complete, its soft folds a testament to the hours spent unravelling the mystery, and her mind, ever active, was already sifting through the aftermath of Mrs. Evans's confession. The housekeeper had been escorted from the hall by the local constable in the early hours, her tearful apologies echoing down the corridor as she clutched a small bag of belongings. The locked box from the hidden room, retrieved from her quarters, now sat in Sir Henry's study, its contents still a mystery, but no longer a source of fear. Miss Marple had advised Sir Henry to handle the matter discreetly, and he had agreed, his scholarly pride tempered by a weariness that spoke of betrayal. Mrs. Evans's 20 years of service had ended in disgrace, but Miss Marple, with her keen understanding of human frailty, felt a pang of sympathy for the woman's desperation, even if her methods had been deplorable. At breakfast, the dining room was subdued, the absence of Mrs. Evans keenly felt. Clara served the tea, her hands steady, but her eyes shadowed, as if the events of the previous night had left her both relieved and unsettled. Sir Henry joined them, his face lined with fatigue, but his manner more composed than the day before. Dr. Mortimer, too, was present, his usual fervour subdued, though he managed a polite nod to Miss Marple. Tom, the groundskeeper, was absent, reportedly tending to the stables, but his relief at the resolution was evident in the lighter step Miss Marple had glimpsed through the window. "Miss Marple," Sir Henry said, setting down his cup, "I owe you a debt I can scarcely repay. You've saved my library, my life's work, from further disruption. I confess, I never suspected Mrs. Evans. She was always so dependable." Miss Marple smiled, her expression gentle, but her eyes sharp. "Dependability, Sir Henry, can mask many things," she said. "Mrs. Evans's loyalty was real, but so was her desperation. A small pension, years of service, it can breed resentment, especially when a treasure like your library seems within reach." Clara leaned forward, her voice low. "But the box, Miss Marple, what's in it? She thought it was valuable, didn't she?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. "I suspect it holds something tied to the shrine legend," she said. "Perhaps a relic or a document of historical significance, but its true value may be more symbolic than monetary. Sir Henry, have you examined it yet?" Sir Henry shook his head, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "Not yet," he said. "After last night, I needed a moment to gather myself, but I've decided to donate it, unopened, to the university, along with the Liber Custodes and the other texts from the hidden room. They're too dangerous to keep here, stirring up old legends and tempting greed. My ancestors' secrets. It can be studied safely elsewhere." Miss Marple nodded approvingly. "A wise decision," she said. "Some knowledge is best left to scholars with no stake in its myths." She glanced at Dr. Mortimer, who flushed slightly but remained silent, his earlier defensiveness replaced by a chastened air. Clara's eyes brightened, a spark of her usual spirit returning. "So the library's safe now?" she asked. "No more whispers or lights?" "I believe so," Miss Marple said, her tone reassuring. "The disturbances were Mrs. Evans's doing, and with her gone, the library should be at peace. Though I dare say, Clara, you'll keep an eye out for any lingering shadows." Clara laughed, a sound that broke the tension in the room. "I will," she promised, "but I'm not sure I'll ever look at the library the same way." After breakfast, Miss Marple accompanied Sir Henry to his study, where the locked box sat on his desk, its serpent carving gleaming in the morning light. It was small but heavy, crafted of dark wood with iron reinforcements, and its lock was intricate, suggesting a craftsmanship older than the hall itself. Sir Henry turned it over in his hands, his expression a mix of curiosity and reluctance. "I've no key for it," he said. "Mrs. Evans claimed she couldn't open it, and I'm not sure I want to. The shrine, the serpent, it's all tied to a past I'd rather leave behind." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the box, her mind conjuring possibilities. A scroll, a jewel, a relic of the ancient shrine, but she agreed with his decision. "Some secrets are best left locked," she said. "Let the university scholars puzzle over it. They'll have the tools and the distance to handle it properly." Sir Henry nodded, setting the box down with a sigh. "You've been a godsend, Miss Marple," he said. "I'll arrange for the box and the manuscripts to be sent off tomorrow, and I'll hire a new housekeeper, someone less inclined to theatrics." Miss Marple smiled, her thoughts drifting to Mrs. Evans' gramophone and curtain cloak. "Theatrics can be revealing," she said. "They show us what someone wishes us to believe." Later that morning, Miss Marple found Dr. Mortimer in the library, packing his notes with a care that suggested he was preparing to leave. His face was pale, but he met her gaze with a newfound respect. "Miss Marple," he said, "I owe you an apology. My secrecy about the Liber Custodes must have seemed suspicious. I was overzealous, perhaps, in my pursuit of its secrets, but I swear I had no part in Mrs. Evans's scheme." "I never doubted your integrity, Dr. Mortimer," Miss Marple said, her voice kind but firm. "Your passion for knowledge is clear, but passion can blind us to others' motives. You'll be more careful in the future, I'm sure." He nodded, his expression chastened. I will, and I'll stick to the alchemical texts from now on. No more chasing. Legends. Miss Marple left him to his work, her thoughts turning to Tom. She found him in the garden, pruning a rosebush with a vigour that suggested relief. Tom, she said, approaching with her usual warmth, I hear the library is no longer a place to fear. You must be pleased. He looked up, his scowl softening. Aye, miss, he said. I never liked that place, but knowing it was just Mrs. Evans messing about, well, it's a weight off. I'll stick to the grounds, though. Safer here. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. A wise choice, she said. The roses need you more than the library does. As she returned to the house, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The mystery was solved, the household restored to order, but a small part of her wondered about the box and its contents. The shrine, the serpent, the guardian. These were threads she had not fully unravelled, and she suspected they held a story that might never be told. But such was the nature of mysteries. She knew some secrets remained, like the shadows in an old house, faint but ever present. That afternoon, Clara joined her for tea in the drawing room, her sketchbook abandoned for the first time in days. Miss Marple, she said, her voice earnest, I can't thank you enough. You've made the hall feel like home again. I was so frightened, but you saw through it all. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her smile warm. Fear, my dear, is often just a shadow cast by someone else's light, she said. You're a bright girl, Clara. Keep your eyes open, and you'll see through many shadows in your time. As the day drew to a close, Miss Marple packed her small suitcase, her shawl now complete and folded neatly in her knitting bag. She had accepted Sir Henry's offer of a car to the station the next morning, her work at Ashwood Hall done. The library, its shelves once alive with whispers, stood silent, its secrets safe, at least for now. As she gazed out at the grounds, where the raven had finally taken flight, Miss Marple felt a quiet contentment. The curse, if it had ever existed, was lifted, not by magic, but by the simple clarity of observation, a skill she had honed in the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 10. Return to St. Mary Mead. The train to St. Mary Mead chugged steadily through the autumn countryside, its rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the quiet intensity of Miss Jane Marple's thoughts. She sat by the window, her small suitcase stowed above, and her knitting bag resting on the seat beside her, its contents now including the completed pale pink shawl. The fields outside were golden, kissed by the September sun, and the villages they passed seemed to doze in the gentle warmth, a stark contrast to the shadowed corridors of Ashwood Hall. Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, sharp as ever, followed the passing landscape, but her mind lingered on the events of the past week, the library's whispers, the cloaked figure, the hidden room, and the unmasking of Mrs. Evans's desperate scheme. The resolution of the mystery had restored peace to the hall, but Miss Marple knew that some questions remained unanswered. The locked box, with its serpent carving, had been sent to the university unopened, its secrets destined for scholarly hands. The shrine beneath the library, a legend woven into the Ashwood family's history, would likely remain a mystery, its power, real or imagined, safely buried. Miss Marple, ever practical, was content to leave such enigmas to others. Her work had been to untangle the human threads of the mystery, and in that she had succeeded. As the train neared St. Mary Mead, she reflected on the household she had left behind. Sir Henry, shaken by the betrayal of his trusted housekeeper, had regained a measure of his scholarly calm, his gratitude evident in the warm farewell he had offered. Clara, with her quick mind and newfound courage, had promised to write, her admiration for Miss Marple's insight clear in her parting embrace. Dr. Mortimer, chastened by his own secrecy, had vowed to focus on his alchemical studies, leaving the occult texts to others. And Tom, the groundskeeper, had returned to his roses with a lighter heart, his fear of the library eased by the knowledge that its disturbances were human, not spectral. The station at St. Mary Mead came into view, its platform bustling with familiar faces. Miss Marple gathered her things, her movements brisk despite the journey's fatigue, and stepped onto the platform, where Florence, her young maid, awaited with a nervous smile. "Oh, miss, you're back!" Florence exclaimed, taking the suitcase. "The village has been all abuzz about your trip to Ashwood Hall. They're saying it's haunted." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "Village gossip is a lively thing, Florence," she said, her voice gentle but amused. "But I assure you, Ashwood Hall's ghosts were far less interesting than its people." Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair by the fire, the familiar scent of lavender and beeswax enveloping her. Her roses, tended by Florence in her absence, nodded in the garden, and the quiet of St. Mary Mead wrapped around her like a well-worn shawl. She resumed her knitting, starting a new project, a scarf for her nephew Raymond, and let her thoughts drift to the mystery now behind her. Raymond arrived the next day, his writer's curiosity alight with questions. "Aunt Jane," he said, settling into the chair opposite her, "the village is full of tales about your adventure. Haunted libraries, cursed shrines. Did you really solve a ghostly mystery?" Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her eyes twinkling. "There was no ghost, Raymond," she said. "Only a housekeeper with a gramophone and a curtain, hoping to turn old legends into profit. People, you see, are far more predictable than spirits. They act from fear, or greed, or loyalty, and those motives leave traces as clear as footprints in the snow." Raymond laughed, shaking his head. "You make it sound so simple. But how did you know it was Mrs. Evans?" Miss Marple paused, her fingers resting on the wool. "It was the little things," she said. "The footprints by the side entrance, too small for Tom or Dr. Mortimer. The gramophone's scratches in the dust where a woman's hand might place it. The red ink, taken from Sir Henry's study, where Mrs. Evans had access. And her fear. It was too performative, too eager to point to a curse. In St. Mary Mead, I've learned that those who protest the loudest often have the most to hide." Raymond leaned back, his eyes warm with admiration. "You're remarkable, Aunt Jane. But what about that box and the shrine? Weren't you curious?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, though a flicker of something deeper passed through her eyes. "Curiosity is a fine thing, Raymond," she said, "but some secrets are best left to others. The box may hold a relic, or a scroll, or nothing at all. The shrine, if it exists, is part of Ashwood's past, not its present. I was there to stop a theft, not to chase legends." As Raymond left, promising to return for tea the next week, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting a soft rhythm in the quiet room. The village outside hummed with its usual life. Mrs. Price at the post office, the vicar planning his sermon, the children playing in the lane. Yet her mind lingered on the serpent symbol, the locked box, the ancient shrine beneath the library. She had solved the mystery of the disturbances, but the deeper history of Ashwood Hall remained a shadow, faint but persistent, like the echo of a whisper in a silent room. She set her knitting aside and gazed out at her garden, where the roses glowed in the fading light. Mysteries, she knew, were like her flowers. Some bloomed fully, their secrets laid bare, while others remained closed, their truths hidden in the bud. Ashwood Hall's secrets were safe, for now, and Miss Marple was content to return to her quiet life, her needles, and the small human dramas of St. Mary Mead. But as she closed her eyes, the image of the serpent lingered, a reminder that even in the quietest villages, the past was never truly silent.